inside RPP. So we have somebody looking at the chat, but I would like to have the whole discussion after you get all the information you have from the presentation. All right, let's maybe start. What is FiSMaDiM? FiSMaDiM is a project funded by the Crown Estate and there's an OWAC frame. The OWAC frame is the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Program, a program which is funding research to enable more or less offshore wind farm into the sea. So the idea is to bring offshore wind farm in a sustainable manner into the waters. Project goal from FiSMaDiM was not just to identify as one of the basic main goals was to find to improve the methods for the spatial distribution of fishing activities of vessels in the UK EZ, but also to assess the constraints opportunity of for the fishing industry in the when offshore wind farm is coming into their fishing grounds. And the main part is that we also would like to have these kind of maps and evidence gathered also made publicly available so that it can be used for policy. So the big main output is a web tool we will show later on today, where we're showing the maps generated and all the work packages 2 and 3. We also have reports and on the method and results on our homepage from the project for anyone who wants to have a little bit more technical explanation. But the idea is also to have the real technical, so more in-depth technical discussions of the methods developed here in the scientific publications. The project, maybe as a basic outline, it started September 2022. We had our kickoff meeting there in St. Andrews in September. We had a half-time meetings last September in Edinburgh. And we are this year, for I call it very optimistic, our final meeting, where we also demonstrate the outputs to a wider audience in London at the Crown Estate, nicely hosted. We only have 1 month left, September, where we try now to finalize everything, so final reporting, but also publishing the web tool so people can have a look into it. And we also will have a dissemination meeting in October, or invited people, I call it, the VIP. Who are we? The project is led by CFAS and it's supported by Scottish Government, but also St. Andrews University. But we are just the project partners per se. We were highly, and I must admit, I can't say enough thank you for all the people in the project advisory group. They spent lots of time helping us to actually shape this project. And they are mostly from the Scottish fisheries organizations like SFPA or SFF, but also offshore wind farm industry, Ofsted, and others. And we also have partners from government in this as well, from GNCC, Natural England, DEFRA, and all. So thanks a lot for all the support, partners. I will give now the floor to Tanya, who's giving you on a work package 2. I should have said what is the outline. We have 2 work packages in this project, which are creating maps. Work package 2 is who's fishing where. Work package 3 is economic constraints and displacement modeling. And now to Tanya to discuss work package 2.
Hi everyone. Work package 2 was responsible to identify the recent spatial distribution of fishing activities in the UK EEZ. And basically, we were answering the question, who is fishing where? And we had 2 main deliverables in this work package. One was to review the data available, the methods and the tools used to work with spatial data from fishing activities. And the second one to update the maps of fishing activity in the UK EEZ. So the first output, the review, the objectives were to provide a brief overview of the different types of data available to identify the spatial distribution of fishing. We assessed the strengths and limitations of the data, the methods, and the tools that were out available to identify the distribution of fishing activities. And we provided recommendations relevant to the application of this data to the project. So this review is very short, and you can see there the DOI and the name of the review if you want to access it. And basically, some of the recommendations that came out from this review were to properly represent fishing activities for offshore wind planning or developments, we need fine-scale depictions of fishing effort. But we also, after evaluating all the data available, we recommended that AIS was implemented into the process with VMS to get the best spatial depiction of fishing activities in the UK EEZ. And that IVMS, so the inshore fleet tracking, should be incorporated in the future, as is not yet available for research projects. So just a brief overview for those of you that don't know what is VMS and AIS. So VMS is a vessel monitoring system. And these are basically a device that reports the position of the fishing vessel every 2 hours. It's mandatory for vessels over 12 meters. And we have the data available for UK flagged vessels. The purpose of this system is mainly for control. And the main issues with the data are that the frequency is too low. So we get a position of each vessel every 2 hours. But also we need to infer fishing activities. It doesn't tell us here is fishing, here it's not fishing. We need to produce or elaborate methods to infer this. And then we have AIS data, automated identification systems, and that reports the position of a vessel every few seconds to minutes, depending on the device. All vessels over 15 meters must have it, but many vessels under 15 have it for safety purposes. So it covers some of the inshore or small scale part of the fleet. And the main issues with these devices in terms of representation of fishing activities is that fishers can turn it off and stop reporting positions sometime, that we might have issues with the reach of the signal to transmit the data. And also, same as with VMS, you have to infer the fishing activities using some methods or statistical methods of models. So when evaluating why to add AIS or incorporate AIS into this depiction of fishing activities, on the left-hand side, we see a map of VMS for 2018. So those are all the positions that were taken, putting together all the data from VMS units. And on the right-hand side, you can see the information that we get from AIS. So you can see that we get at least the same or more information actually coming from the use of these devices. And just to show you some examples of individual vessels. So on the left-hand side, you can see a vessel showing their VMS data, and on the right-hand side, the same vessel, but with AIS data. So you can start seeing how using AIS might increase the temporal frequency of the data and depict better your fishing activities for vessels. And here are some other examples. You can see VMS on the left-hand side again, and AIS on the right-hand side of the presentation. And in some cases, you might not have VMS data at all. So vessels, most vessels less than 12 meters won't have that. And in this case, this is an example of a under 12 meter vessel, fishing vessel. So AIS will augment the numbers of vessels that you can represent in space, basically. So we said, okay, great. We have identified these two all readily available data sets. We have VMS and we have AIS. Let's start incorporating that data. The Maritime Management Organization provided us a list of active fishing vessels from 2012 to 2021, which was the agreed temporal resolution of the project, if you want to say it like that. And we had some information on 7,120 vessels, fishing vessels, active fishing vessels in the UK EEZ. Out of those, 6,700 had a UK flag, and other non-UK flags were mainly Ireland, Norway, Belgium, and France. But the first issue that we found is that there was no common identifier between this VMS data and this AIS data, so that we could say this vessel will join the AIS data and make it better. So we started tackling that issue, and we reached out to several sources of information. The MMO provided the identifiers of the AIS, unique AIS identifiers to be able to merge it with the VMS identifiers. The MMO provided information for 400 vessels. The Maritime Coastal Authority provided information for 112 vessels. And we look at the EU fleet registry, from which we gained another 400 vessels. And we contacted our colleagues at Global Fishing Watch and obtained information for 2,800 vessels. That's about 40% of the vessels that we were looking at. And then we looked at marine traffic as well and obtained information for about 900 vessels. Now, when you look at the cumulative numbers, because some of these data sets have the same vessels, we see that we had approximately 45% of the starting list that MMO provided, where we could identify the AIS identifier to the vessel. So we're very happy with that, and we started producing all these maps about the distribution of the fishing activities. And then we showed it to our project advisory group members. And that's when we realized we had some issues, because we got a lot of feedback from the members. We talked to several fisheries representatives, and we're told that some of our fishing maps were not correct in identifying the right location of some fishing activities. For example, there was some trap fishing in areas where there shouldn't be any fishing with traps, or some pelagic trawling in areas where they shouldn't. So we went one step back and said, okay, why is this happening? And so we thought, okay, let's look at marine traffic and verify these matches that we're getting between the AIS devices and the VMS devices. So marine traffic has this website where you can see the vessel name, you can see the length of the vessel, but also if you keep looking, scrolling through, you can see pictures of the vessels. In these pictures, you can sometimes see the plate number of the vessel. The plate number can be linked as well to the MMO dataset. So we had an intern working hours and hours on this, looking at the pictures and just making sure that all these matches were correct. And we found a lot of mistakes in these data sets provided by, we mentioned before. So basically, we reviewed the 45% of the vessel coverage. We reviewed one by one, and then we produced a final corrected list of matches to be able to integrate these two data sets. So what we have is 7,120 vessels operating in the UK EEZ. Out of those, we have EMS data for 1,281. And then we look at, okay, how many AIS vessels with AIS data are operating in the UK EEZ? And we found 3,750 vessels, which are listed as fishing vessels, but not necessarily fishing in the UK EEZ. But then we matched that with the list of active vessels fishing in the UK provided by MMO, and we see that we had information for 2,785 new vessels. Well, no, vessels. Out of these 2,700, 569, we had overlapping information from the VMS units and the AIS units. So we were augmenting information, more temporal resolution to 569 vessels that already had VMS data. And we were adding to this data set 1,788 new vessels, UK and non-UK flag, but 1,245 new vessels with AIS data that had a UK flag, from a UK flag. So these are mostly vessels smaller than 12 meters that are not being tracked being tracked by VMS units. So just to give you an example of what that means then spatially, on the left-hand side, you can see a map with only AIS data. So you can see some new data where we only had data from the AIS devices mapped. And in the center of the figure, you can see AIS and VMS. So it's the VMS data augmented with information from AIS. And on the right-hand side, you can see where we only had information for the vessels with VMS devices. So just to show you how this data was augmenting or representing vessels that were perhaps not there, and also augmenting the data for VMS. And these are our final maps now. After going through this process of iteration with the project advisory group, we have now grouped fishing into 8 main gear categories. So we have pelagic midwater trawling, for example, surrounding nets, gill nets and entangling nets, seine nets, hooks and lines, demersal trawls, traps, and dredges. And this data that we're showing here right now, these maps are aggregated fishing effort from 2012 until 2021, grouped into 5 by 5 kilometer grid cells, and only showing grid cells where at least 3 vessels were operating. So we're trying to respect some of the commercial sensitivities and the GDPR sensitivities of the data. These maps will all go to the Work Package 4 tool that Renee is going to talk about to you later. So some of the conclusions and recommendations for this work package was that adding AIS data resulted in better representation of fishing activity in 2 ways. One, it incorporates information on smaller vessels. 2, you can actually get more data on a per trip level for bigger vessels. The second recommendation we have, well, the second output we have is that there's now this method to basically merge this AIS data with VMS data, and that has been shared with CIFAS. We had conversations with MMO because there has to be a process where this to register, to record this unique identifier between these 2 data sets if we want this a long-term process. We still need to do validation on methods to infer fishing and hauling activities. I didn't talk that much about this because there's very precise processes for this, but we are using speed thresholds at the moment to infer whether a vessel is fishing or not. And there are some onboard observer data sets at CIFAS, at Marine Scotland that could be used to validate which method would work better for each gear group, for example. As I said, the maps that we are showing and that's going to be shared with the public are maps that represent fishing activities, taking into consideration or respecting this minimum 3 vessel rule, but that actually results in omission of some fishing areas. So there's something to be discussed around what to do if you want to represent properly the whole fleet. We're looking forward to IVMS data coming out for these research processes to represent all vessels below 12 meters aggregate. So yeah, that's me for now. Give back the 20.
Now we're talking more about the constraint opportunities for the fishing industry with offshore wind farm. And we had in this work package 3 tasks. One was kind of generating indicators to identify sensitivity of the area for the fishing industry, but then also for the UKEZ, but then also do some displacement modeling for some case studies, and then put it all together in the economic impact assessment. So let's talk about the first one, the sensitivity thing. One of the first things we learned when we started to talk about sensitivity of fishery is that there were lots of people had different concepts when we started this project. So we asked our project advisory group, can you please tell us what actually you would like to see there? And mainly it came out, it was mainly about economic dependency, vulnerability of as soon as you restrict their access to the fishing ground. So we tried now to incorporate it. And this is now the final table. It was a process, I would call it a painful process, with a project advisory group to develop that we're capturing aspects of sensitivity. So the basic idea is that, or the basic criticism is that landing values is a nice idea to capture economic importance, but there are much more aspects which are not captured. And we might try to find indicators which can capture the others kind of economic importance, the economic characteristics. And one of the aspects, for example, was how many vessels, how many business are dependent on this area. So we try to capture this one by just simply have the proportion of vessels, which is a significant amount of the annual revenues in the area, and put it in proportion to other vessels as well. We had another one was like, oh, we can't move. There is no, this fish or this species we are targeting is just in one area. So we try here as well, capturing that there is maybe a high value stock, high value species, only a limited amount of fishing areas available in grids. This is indicator 3, where we try to capture this one. There was another one, it's like, oh, how concentrated is the fishing industry in this area? Is it, a couple of vessels, but they're all equally in it? Or is it one big vessel dominating it and have a very strong, and if you kind of restrict access for this one, it might have a bigger impact on the businesses than if it's, partly. So we're trying to capture all these aspects the fishing industry asked us to. But this more or less, there's also a couple of aspects came up was about the variability within the year and also between years. So some fishing industries, for example, fleet segments, let's say, for example, scallop fishing is going every 6 years into an area sometimes because it's very seasonal. So they would like to have this one captured as well. It might not be, each year very important to them, but every 6 years, this area is important to them. So we ended up with 12 indicators. And as you can imagine, 12 indicators for 8 year groups, Tanya presented already, and then 10 years. It's quite a lot of data. So you have about 1,000 layers if you wanted to. So for the policy point of view, maybe not the best way to actually handle it. So we tried now to reduce the complexity of these indicators, but still keeping the content of the indicators. And by doing it, what we did is firstly split the different indicators, the 12 ones we had, into either they're just context providing, they're good to know, but they're just providing context, into, these are actually really sensitivity indicators. After splitting them, we tried to, I must admit, playing around with different ways, how you could actually create an index out of it. We played around with some statistical methods and others. The 2 ways we are now proposing to do was one sensitivity index 1, where we simply standardized all 7 indicators, which are core fishing sensitivity indicators, and then just give them ranks over the distribution and just sum them up. It's equally, each indicator has the same values, same rate. This is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is just simply rating them by the number of years the indicators was important for the fishing industry. These layers were done for each year, the index rated, and then for the web tool, again, just to reduce the dimensions, we created a 3, 5, and 10 years average for each year group. So we're now ending up from these 1,000 layers to 90 layers. Still a lot, but a little bit more easier to handle for policy. Just to, what are we calling context? What is sensitivity indicators? The one which are just more or less about seasonal variability and how much deer groups are in an area, we say it's context. It's not really, it's nice to know that there are so many deer groups in the area, but it's not crucial. What we thought is crucial is that the economic impact directly, which is something like the percentage of vessels, which has a high, significant annual revenue area, or this, how many species are catched there, which have just a limited scope. So we have 2 indicators as proposal, how you can use it, 2 indexes. One is was equally measuring all of them, but it's all about trying to capture the economic importance and going a little bit away from landing values simply. So we applied these indicators to data. The data we take from work package 2, but here, because work package 2 has also had international vessels in it, we only filtered out all UK flagged vessels simply because we only have for them the catch value. And then the catch value, we kind of combine them together. The catch value, however, is reported on ICIS rectangle. So we use the VMS tool, which is a standardized tool for ICIS, for VMS data, sorry. for VMS data to assign catch to a location. We use this tool to actually assign our landing values, but this time on C-square grids. C-square grids are something like 0.05 degrees. So it's related to 5K to 5 kilo square grids, so very small scale. Equally. So how representative is our data we are using? As Tanya might have mentioned, we didn't have too many vessels in it. An average 70% of the vessels, which is about 18% of the trips, the UK fishing, for fishing activity. However, from an economic point of view, more importantly, it's we have 68% of the landing values actually captured in the data. So it's not too bad. It sounds small to begin with, but we have a majority of the landing values of the UK flag vessels in the data. These are the indicators compared to landing values. And what you can see here is that actually, if you just take landing values, you see some areas, I can't do it with a mouse, some areas which are of high landing, so of high importance when you just use landing values. These areas still come out in the indicators. The same is still areas. However, using the indicators, you're adding more areas to it. So areas which haven't come out before as important to the fishing fleet. You can see here the whole western coast of Scotland is now classified as sensitive for the fishing. It doesn't matter which setup you're using over the most of all. It matters a little bit for the other groups. This is more or less. As I said, we did a 3, 5, and 10 years average. For the 10 years average, we agreed with the fishing representative that it should be fine, so it's not too commercially sensitive to show the whole average. So we didn't suppress here the data for the 10 years one, but we suppressed the data for the 3 and 5 years. So you can't really see too much, but what more or less came out here, if you use the indicators for each, it doesn't matter which average, it was relatively stable over the years. So also, again, it doesn't really matter which indicators you used. If you're weighting it with, also when you're weighting it a little bit with the years of activity, you will see that the more mobile year, you have a little bit more variation, which you would expect. However, the more important one, or the more, I would call it annoying one for us researcher, is that we had to suppress data. So you don't see much if we show you the maps to the public. But this is something for somebody else to sort out, I must admit. But these are the sensitivity indicators. There is a report which is kind of detailing the method, and so for anyone interested in reading this. So task 2, displacement modeling. So displacement models, I think, is the terminology used quite often nowadays, I would call it. Some people ask just simply fishers. They do kind of state preference approach, asking fisher, where would you displace to? Some people do assumptions. What we did here in this project was using random utility theory. We just simply assumed fishers are rational and they have stable preferences. And more or less say, it means fishers maximizing the profit. They will over time, just simply as this. And we using here locations choice model, a site choice model, which more or less estimates the probability that fisher will choose the site over alternative sites he has to choose from. So we give him a choice set, saying you choose it. And then more or less the displacement part is, if my first choice is not available, what would be my second choice? Then you can calculate, okay, how far is the second choice further away? What is the economic impact for it? So that's a basic outline of the displacement model. Very simple. We are aware that the world is complex, but for the beginning, let's start somewhere. We're trying to simplify everything as much as possible. So we're stripping out all the things. We know that's the complexity of the fishing operation per se. But we more or less say, the fisher already decided he's going out. This is already done. He decided we are going fishing. He already decided, let's say, I take a dredge. He already decided I take 2 people with me. He has it all decided. The only thing he hasn't decided yet is where to go. Really just simply making our life easy. As a starting point, we are aware it's totally simplifying life, but we have to start somewhere. Then we kind of saying, okay, what is he actually based his choice for? Which side he would choose? And we're assuming it's the expected revenue. He has a kind of expectation how much he will earn at this time, but also how much he will go there, how much it costs him to go there. And there's some uncertainty often about the outcome. So he will calculate this one in as well. This is how he forms the expectation. However, expectation formulation, if you're looking into the literature, it's a huge literature, and everyone has something he thinks is more important than others. But it's a complexity of it, I would call it. But mainly it's based on your past experience. So if you have been in a site, had a big catch, you will think, oh, next time I'm going, I will as well. Maybe you haven't had the big catch, but maybe one of your buddies will have a big catch. But then this question is your buddy, was it somebody you met in a pub, or was it somebody you really well know? So this information, you might share information with somebody, but you might also put a weight on it, how reliable the source is. So there might be some about information sharing. There's lots of discussion about learning. How do you learn from it? Are you adapting? We see some fishers who never adapt, who just go there to the same location again and again. It doesn't matter of the outcome. Some will adapt. So then some will also infer from experience they did in the vicinity of the site. Some won't. Some are very, oh my God, I know there is a huge payoff site. It's risky. I might go there. It's a long distance. But if I'm successful, I have this huge payoff. If I'm not successful, okay. But so some are more risk-friendly, I would call it, than others. So fishers are different. So we have to kind of control for it. That's why we normally do it fisher by fisher, have an agent-based model. So each fisher is individual. However, for sake of ours, we try again to simplify. So this is all things which is possible, but let's do what we did here. So we have at CFATS at the moment 3 versions set up how you could actually generate this expectation, but they were all done on ISIS rectangles. So on the same level, you actually have the catch reports, which makes our life much easier there. On the ISIS rectangle, you can actually do something like simply past experience, say, this is my past experience, that's what I expect. We have done it, it's done quite a lot. This is the TTR model. There's another model from FiSMaDiM, where they just also add information sharing in it. Again, you can play around there, who's talking to whom. And then there's a one which is a Hutchinson-Minch model, which is more about learning, as a dynamically updating, while every time you're having a new experience, you're updating over space and time. For this project, because we are here on C² grids, we want to go spatial resolution as low down as possible. We simply started with the TDR, with a very simple model, easy to set up. So more or less the assumption is the skipper would choose the area, the site, which maximize expected operating profit. And then what he choose from, so what are the alternative sites he choose from? We give him all the sites he visited previously. And then it's also, how does he form expectation? Again, just simply on the landing values he did in the past. So very simple, straightforward. And I think that's a moment I also have to explain people, we are on a research project. Don't mind people. But anyway, we decided in the project on 3 case studies, Maury East, Hornsey 1 and 2, and the Royne extension. And the basic idea is that we firstly set up the explanatory model. And if the explanatory model explains the current site choices, we should be able then to how it's predicting out and then compare about it. So we try to find case studies which were implemented at different times, also construction at different times, but also different sizes, different fisheries affected. So that was a basic goal why we choose these 3 case studies. Working hypothesis, also what you would expect to see is that at time of construction, just simply for health and safety consideration, there should be at least a reduced level of fishing or fishing at all taking place in the wind farm. This thing. And then after construction, we would think that there should be a shift of fisheries. Maybe, we are moving from mobile gear to static gear, just simply because mobile gear is not possible anymore in the offshore wind farm sites. Or we should see then the mobile gear is going into different areas, some other areas, and not coming back. This is kind of hypothesis you would have when you're going there. However, that's where the research part comes in. Looking at the data, just simply, firstly, Maury East was scallop twitches. It's demersed raw. It stayed all over the years. There was no shift in fisheries. The same happened for Hornsey. It was pots and traps. Didn't shift it over the years. Didn't matter. Warning extension, at least we stop fishing at time of construction, but otherwise we don't really see a reduction of fishing. We see variation of fishing, which might be driven from external stuff. It's time of COVID, time of EU exit. There's lots of stuff going on there, but we can't see a significant reduction of fishing in the time. So which is already not a good sign that we can't detect it on this level of temporal resolution we're having, because we're aggregating everything in an year. It doesn't matter if you use UK vessels as before or trips, it's the same picture. So while the models nicely converged, it doesn't explain anything, the choices, unfortunately. So I won't even show the results. So more or less the reason for it is it the right data we're having? Or, we are now have nice high resolution data, but is it the right data? What I mean with this is issue one is, how do we assign the catch to the area? The catch is report an ISIS rectangle. In this case here, for example, we're seeing here, we have a fisher who has to decide between two sides. On one side he has a high payoff, on the other side he has a low payoff. More or less same travel distance to go for. What would you choose? Clearly the one with a high payoff. It's a maximum profit. However, as soon as we go on the C-square grid, we're spreading the profit over amount of grid cells. And now we kind of artificially even them out. So in this case, I just made it up, is that we more or less spreading out the high profit into 3 times higher number of grids. So each of the grid has more or less similar amount. There is no variation between the grids. And simply, the model chooses randomly one grid cell because there is no significant test grid cell to choose from. That's the first one, first issue. How can we solve that issue? We can go for a larger grid size, but then the question is the grid size really then good for marine spatial planning? Is it useful or not? Or we could try to think about developing new methods, tools to actually really assign which value is taken by which hole. There are lots of new technology out there with SWAM and other things, machine learning tools. It might be worthwhile to look into these ones on a long-term perspective. Issue number 2, which is more or less on the model-based issue, is that the model is based on past experience. ISIS rectangle, again, it doesn't really matter because you sum it up within the ISIS rectangle. So, you have one value for the rectangle, doesn't matter where in the rectangle you are. As soon as you go on a smaller grid, you don't have any values anymore when you just vary it a little bit. So you don't have a past experience anymore. So you're losing this kind of information again for the model to do anything with it because it doesn't have any experience. How can we solve this issue? Okay, this is pointed down here. Again, larger grid size might work, but might then be not really helpful for marine spatial planning anymore. You could also think about this information sharing we talked about previously, that you actually kind of imply that you might not have an experience in the site, but somebody else might have experience. So you kind of infer from there, or you kind of playing around with a moving window approach. There's different ways of how you could do it, possibly. You could also just say, look, we don't really need it as small as it is now. We can just, restrict ourselves to core fishing areas and play around there. If any of them really, really works, who knows? This is a research part, which is a fun part, but can also be the frustrating part. Issue number 3, what we talked a little bit about is that in this project, what we try to do is really focusing on the spatial resolution. We try to be as small, that you're really precise in the location as much as possible. And even there, and we're just aggregating everything over a season, even there we had something like each fisher, because we are so small scale, had something about 900 grids in average to choose from each time he wants to go fishing. No fisher is going to do it. But you can also imagine the computational dimension it had. My poor little laptop had something like 10 gigabyte data sets to go through. He was not happy about it. So if we want to increase the temporal resolution as well, which we might need, because what we see in the data, explanatory data, is that fishing activity is still taking place in construction site, which might be the case, because construction is not all over the planning area. It might be just in one part, and the fishing activity in another part. We need to also increase the temporal resolution. So one way of doing it is more or less trying to go for some of the heuristic models, which is totally different setup. So this models I showed before are statistical models. Heuristic models is more, they have advantage, they can use big data sets. However, you have to make much more assumptions, how they're going there, where they're going. There are some all over the place. I just mentioned here's the one from Oxford University, which is also called Poseidon. But there are other as well in place. Are they so much better? I can't tell. Something to test out. But at least they would be able to cope with the data side of the interpretation of things. So this is more or less from work package 3. We were able to produce indicators, which I think capturing quite nicely the economic importance of fishing location and can give you insights into the economic impact. We provided 2 different ways of doing it. I would usually normally recommend, if you have the chance and you want to do it for a specific fishing fleet, to maybe double check that we have all characters included. Maybe it might be something local, very local, which is not part of it. But these indicators are flexible enough to add or reduce. Modeling of displacement is not really working at the moment, not in this way we did it, just simply because the data reporting is not at the same level as should be for catch. Final remarks I did here. Just for work package 2 and 3, work package 4 is coming in a minute. For anyone interested, we have a review of fisheries dependent data in England and Scotland. There's a new method how to detect fishing location high spatial resolution, and there are indicators now. That should all be coming into a web tour, which can be publicly assessed. And we learned that displacement models is not working in the form, even the simplest form we wanted to do. So it's at least a lesson learned. New data, new method of data collection needs to be also think about how you actually use the data later on, so that you collect the right data, not just data. I think that's from my side. I would now give the floor over to René if it works. René, can you try to present?
Just about to try and share my screen now.
Yes, I will stop sharing. Can you share, René?
Yeah, it doesn't want me to allow me to share my screen. There we go. Hopefully that's come up.
We can see us. Yeah.
Can you see a map now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is René Swift. I'm based at the Coastal Resources Management Group at the University of St Andrews. And Mark James and myself were tasked in Work Package 4 to produce a web tool for people to be able to view the output of Work Packages 2 and 3 of the FiSMaDiM project. The website we tried to keep in a format that's easily accessible, and most of the important information that you want to get hold of is all contained on the home page, which is the page that you're moment. The user is able to interact with that page, zoom in, zoom out, drag and drop, as you'd expect on any web mapping tool. Your user is then able to select which layer they want to choose to display. You have a number of layers. Each layer represents a sensitivity index or supporting index, and each of the different fisheries, the 8 different fisheries that Tanya described. So I can click on one and choose to display that information. I can also, I'm just going to give you some examples. If I have a layer selected, I can zoom into a particular layer and click on one of the grid cells, and it's going to give me some information about that particular grid cell for that particular fishery and for that particular index. I can, if I choose to overlay the different wind farm infrastructure on top of those layers, And as you can see, they've been highlighted here. And again, if I want some information about those wind farms, I can click on that position, and it tells me that that particular wind farm is in pre-planning and a pre-planning application. So you can see how the different indices for each of the different fisheries overlays on proposed, active, or planned wind farms. Over to the left-hand corner of the web page, you've got some basic tools for zooming in and zooming out and doing some measurements. And along the bottom, you have some what I call most important or useful information in my view. The first button gives you access to some information about how to scroll around the website, how to use each of the different tools. Second one is just to give you an idea of what coordinate reference system is, and the units are on the map, because that's quite important to understand when you're making measurements. We have links to the different base maps that we are using to overlay, which we are overlaying our results on top of. And again, you can select to turn those on and off in the layers bar. And then there's an explanation of the raster layers, which are effectively the output of work package 2, which is total hours fishing per grid cell. An explanation of the different vector layers. There are going to be vector layers for the study area and other such things, vector layers for the different wind farm sites, and vector layers for each of the different sensitivity indices for each different fishery. Because it's they're quite complicated results to understand, or different indices are there. We put an explanation of what the different sensitivity indices represent and what the different supporting indicators represent. And there's also an explanation of the different type groupings. So for example, demersal trawls actually encompasses a number of different fishing types. So bottom trawls, otter trawls, pear trawls, etc. So to understand what each of those groups represent, you have that information there. Should you want to look at more of the geodata information, you can look at the geographic data sets, and it will give you some information about the coordinate reference system that we're using, the raster format that we're using, and the different vector formats we are using. Most people are familiar with the Esri shapefile format, and layers will be available in that, and a geopackage format. And there's some information about the web mapping tools that we use. There is a raster atlas for each of the different fisheries for work package 2. They've been designed so that you can either download the file in a geographic format, or you can click on that image, right click and save it as an image. And if I just quickly go to it's easy enough for you to insert directly into a presentation. So there we go. So there's each 8 tiles for each of the different fisheries. For work package 3 output, we have a similar tiled layout for each of the different vector layers. There will be one for the study area, one for each of the different wind farm sites or active and operational, etc. And then one for each of the different sensitivities indices for each of the different fisheries. Under the geodata format, you have links to the underlying base maps and under the documents, you've got links to OEC on the OEC webpage. And it's so you can find about more information about the offshore wind evidence and change program. And you can also find out more about the FiSMaDiM project. If I go back to the main page, because it loads a lot of data, it takes a while to load. These are probably the most important buttons that you'll want to interact with. There's one called Limitations and Restrictions, which defines the limitations of the data, why we're restricted to using cells with greater than 3 vessels in, and some of the many caveats that may be associated with that data that are important to understand for users if they're going to use that in their work going ahead. The license information is released under an Open Government License 3. There are terms and conditions that apply to that license, and some of the materials that the FiSMaDiM products, data products or results are based on have different licensing associated with them, and you may need to, if you're going to use those particular products, you will need to cite them in the correct way. Finally, there's the citation that will be used when you're referencing the project. That needs to be updated. That goes with the final reports. The acknowledgements you need to make, and there are links to each of the logos for each of the different project partners, because I like to be able to access things from one website rather than having to search around on all sorts of different websites for those things. And if you want the data, it's just a simple get data button, and you can either download the complete data set, which would be images, logos, the raster atlas, the vector atlas, and the metadata, or you can choose to download the raster atlas or the vector atlas. That's work package 2 output and work package 3 output, or you'll find links to find them on data repositories such as the Crown State data portal or National Marine Planning up in Scotland. So I think that's the web portal. It will be updated slowly over this month to have a final release at the end of the month. And I will hand it back to Angela and the group back there.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yep. Thanks, Renee. And just a second. Quickly goes through. Bear with me 1 second somehow. So the web tool, if anyone is asking, at the moment we are busy to move it over into the SV system, which is then available on the CFAS data portal, CFAS spatial data portal. We are hoping for end of this month that it's publicly available, but there's still some boxes to be ticked officially. Be available. There. I think that's all from our side. Thank you for your attention. And now time for question.
Let's put it in the chat or in the question, any.
I have no preference, whatever works. They can also just put their cameras on and maybe talk to us.
Yeah, I guess we can unmute. Now,
Yeah.
see.
Look for the chat.
Okay. Any burning question already in the chat? Sharing so they can see people. We have an hour left for anyone asking any questions.
Do you want me to chair the We've got a first question there, which is how do you see IVMS being incorporated in the future?
That's a good question. Tanya, I leave this to you.
Yeah, we've been in conversations with MMO, and there's hope for the same procedures with VMS data to be extended to IVMS data, to be able to incorporate that data also in the future. I hope that answers your question, but we are thinking about it very hard, how to do that in the easiest way.
You know how many were under 12 meters of the vessels with EIS?
Oh, Oliver, I can't tell you out of the top of my head, but I think it's 800 or something vessels.
There's something missing in your question. Do you maybe want to come?
I could see a hand up from Colin, I think.
Colin, yeah, maybe.
Is unmuted.
You can speak, Colin, if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, unfortunately, Will and myself, and maybe there is others, were not able to see your screen during the first bit of the presentation. Actually, it was when it came to the in-depth looking at it. But as a former skipper of a tow mobile gear, it's fine using VMS and AIS, but what do you actually understand of the restrictions that the fishing industry has to live with, which is the topography of the seabed, including wrecks, hard ground, and man-made objects? Because that will end up, when you come to model displacement, it may look clear from the surface, but in reality, the skipper won't be able to move because of certain seabed conditions. And how do you marry that into your data set?
From the displacement side, because we're using past fishing locations, if it's not anything very recent, it should be incorporated, because you would assume that the fisher, if, for example, if the seabed is not giving you the fishing opportunity in this area, that the fisher hasn't been there in the past. So if he hasn't been there in the past, he should not be in there in the future. So that's why it's nice. It's the advantage of using the past experiences, because you don't put them into area they shouldn't be in geographic point of view. Does it make sense? It's only recent changes you then have when you're predicting out, double check that you don't put them. Answer your question.
So the next question was that the portal indicated it was only over 12s, but we indicated that it does include some under 12 vessels through AIS. So could you explain where 12 meters are included and where they aren't?
So the VMS data is only mandatory for over 12-meter vessels. Some have it voluntarily. If we had data for them under 12 meter, we kept them in. So we had, because Tanya was not so reliant on catch data, if she could identify the vessel, she kept them in if they're under 12. So there were some under 12. If I had good enough catch data, I kept them in as well. So we have the under 12 in. This needs to be updated in the portal. It's just, it needs to be said that this over 12 is mandatory for VMS. That's why it's mainly restricted to over 12. They are overly in it. We have to update the portal. Sorry.
There was a question from Mike that you just edited
Okay.
before.
So for the case studies demonstrating vessel use of a site during construction, how did we account for vessel disruption agreements and different restrictions during development, i.e. rolling closures?
We didn't, and that was one of the issues I tried to highlight, because we more or less just put it under the time, on the year. And we need, if we really want to do something more on the modeling side, be precise. We cannot just focus on the space. We also have to focus on the temporal side, also on the time side. And that there is some, as you said, there is sometimes that they can go in, sometimes they can't go in. So we need to increase or be better.
Karen, do you want to ask yours as you're sat here?
That's mine. I put it in the chat while I'm here as well.
Talk to me.
Sure. So for the displacement element, the three wind farms that you chose have quite distinct layouts in terms of their orientation and spacing. Would you consider sort of a specific take consideration the layouts of the wind farms with that displaces fishing as opposed to just a binary construction?
Haven't.
No?
Haven't.
Okay.
Because I think we didn't go as far.
Okay.
So if the first part doesn't work, you can't start to look into the second part would be then how does fleet adapt. I think the layout comes into the fleet adaptation.
Yes. Yeah. There's
Yeah,
potential.
if I get the first part at some point going, then good point.
So from a global perspective, do you think that there are any other territories where the limitations of data resolution or other limitations may be different?
Yes. We are here in UK and we have here already, I don't know how many different reporting requirements. So Scottish government collects data differently than the English and the Welsh government. There are differences. US collects totally differently. So I mean, Northeast also different than the Pacific. Yeah. So data is collected differently everywhere. So the restriction, and it was collected originally for enforcement, not for actually figuring out marine spatial planning. So the way data was collected traditionally was never meant to inform these kind of models per se on this high spatial resolution. And I think at the moment we are pushing very much the boundaries here. So one thing is what we're trying to stress this morning already is that we actually also have to think about data reporting, you know, are there better methods to do, are there better data collection ways of doing?
We've got a question on climate change, which is where climate change is likely to lead to a shift in the spatial distribution of fishing. How can we account for that?
This is the next step. Look for it, especially in the sensitivity index. We only have 10 years of it, but we have one thing as what we want to think about is how we get, for example, the models of climate change, where they're showing us a distribution of fish or the predicting how we can, for example, incorporate them with the sensitivity index so that we can maybe predict from there the changes. This is something we still want at least to think about the next months. This was a more or less the outcome of this morning. Climate change needs to be a little bit more implemented, conceptually.
So I'm going to wrap the next couple of questions into one. So the first question was, did you account for displacement and then subsequent sort of secondary displacement where you're displacing fishing activity into areas that are already fished by other fishers, and what is the economic consequence for them? And recognizing that we haven't, what is the plan for progressing the displacement modelling elements of the work? What are the next steps for the displacement modelling?
Firstly, to find a project which is funding it, to more research. So from the theoretical point, the displacement model, the way it's set up, it should not actually put you into area where other fishing activity is, simply, or at least where it hasn't been in the past. Recent changes is something, that's why we wanted to test the predictive power, because if you have been fishing there in the past, you should be able to fish there in the future at least, except there's changes. And this is something we need to address. So this concern about displacing fisheries somewhere that it couldn't go should not be there in theory by the models. This is theory. Where to go with the displacement models, I think, is trying to play around a little bit. Firstly, as I said, a little bit crit sizes. This is an easy solution. It's just simply increase the crit size. So it should be a quick, easy, straightforward test. Just something small and simple, and see if this helps already. Another way you could think about new method to assign the catch to the areas, play around there a little bit before you change the full model approach. I think it depends also a little bit what you want to do at the end of the day with the displacement models. You actually want to inform, and it's very important. I mean, for offshore wind farm, it seems to be very important to get the temporal resolution. So you might actually better opt to move everything over to a more deterministic model, and yet, which is then a huge, big model, explains the world, explain the whole system, but it might be worthwhile then to invest into this one first, and then have huge starting investment, but then at least you have the resolution you want and can actually play around a lot more on a side. So yeah, there are different ways you can go forward here. depends on really what you want to do.
So the next two, again, are linked, which is around what is the plan for updating the data within this report, and how often are we intending to update it?
This is something we are still, I would call it sorting, but not really sorting. One of the reasons why we put it in the CFA Spatial Data Hub is that we can more easily at least update the data on the sensitive index or available data. The CFA Spatial Data Hub has also fisheries dependent data in it. So in principle, it would take somebody, if one of the government says, yes, we are supporting, we want to have the most recent one, to just simply press the button, update the data. One part which is a little bit, we need to discuss a little bit more is Web Package 2, because at the moment we have a way of linking AIS and BMS, but how it works in the future when new vessels coming in, this might be needs a little bit more work to update and keep updated. But this is something we are working on to keep maintained.
Yeah, it'd be fair to say that there's going to be a number of recommendations coming out of the back end of this project that will need to be taken forwards, and the regular update of that is one of them.
The good thing is that it's actually with government agencies together, so hopefully we all work nicely together to get updated and keep updated.
So, got another question from Mike Roach. Whilst I understand the need for a single metric for effort, I would be concerned that the hours fished is used for static gear fisheries. This can be misleading when considering displacement and policy decisions. How can you see suitable metrics for specific fisheries influencing the overall outputs?
I give this one to you, Tanya.
I thought this was yours. Yeah, it's both of us. Well, our fished, yeah. We have fishing effort as hours fished at the moment. There's ways to include, if we get the right data, we can consider or explore the time that the gear was fishing, not the time that gear was being hauled, in terms of fishing effort, which would change how it looks like at the moment. In terms, we're really, for static gear, what we're doing now is representing gear hauling time. Yeah. But apart from that, I think what comes then in Work Package 3 is they're trying to recuperate other aspects, not just this time or hours fished, but how important are the grounds for each vessel's business model, basically. So that's what the other indicators are trying to do, just not focus solely on fishing effort or on landing values, but how much does that particular business depend on that particular fishing ground? So not just economic indicators.
The classic one.
The next two questions focus on future displacement models and how they could work. The first one asks whether displacement models can or will include cumulative impacts. So where you've got multiple offshore wind deployments, or you've got marine protected areas, can the models account for that cumulative effect? And the second one looks at, when modeling that displacement, whether there's any consideration of a vessel's ability to move in and out of the 12 on the basis that some crews cannot work inside 12 nautical miles.
To the first one, secondary and cumulative impact.
Cumulative impact.
In principle, it should be able, if we're ever coming to this, because you would assume that then, maybe your second one is also available, second option. So firstly, you would like to go to the first option, not available. Second, you go to second option, not available. You have to go down the map. And so you have then additional impacts. So in principle, cumulative impacts should be feasible. But because before it was secondary impact is at the moment not depicted. So I would be more worried about secondary impact than cumulative impact depicted in the models. About changing side outside 12 nautical mile, it depends on which models. The most simplest model we're having here doesn't allow for it. It just allows you into the area you have been before. Maybe somebody else has been before, but then it's a question, who do you take as a reference point? You could take another boat similar length, similar power, and say this is actually, and give them the alternative. The third model, which I mentioned, the Hutchinson, it gives you kind of a playing field where you could go wherever. And then it's more important then to control if it's actually reasonable or feasible for the vessel to go into any site. So each of these models, depending on the assumptions you're having, has pros and cons. The Hutchinson model has the advantage. It's more explorative. It allows you to explore new areas. It allows you to go in other areas. But yes, you have to control more if it's actually reasonable to go in the areas. The others don't allow for this.
Thank you. So there aren't currently any more, and I don't think there are any hands up.
Can't see any.
Is it possible to view the layers for individual indicators or only for the sensitivity indices?
At the moment, it's just more being nice to our GIS person. We only plan to have the sensitivity indices for the public. Just simply, there are already 90 layers and you have to lead the 90 layers and make them nice looking and so on. It's quite a lot of work. So don't underestimate the poor chap who's doing it at the moment. So that's why we actually moment talked about just keeping the indices for the public. But I think there's some discussion we have to have as a ground state anyway, how much the individual indicators are useful to have, and then take it from there, how much we make them also available for other stakeholders. Because I think this morning there was some discussion about, oh, you're saying we want to adapt it locally. I mean, how can we adapt it if we don't have the individual ingredients? Fair point. So it's something to discuss how we're doing it also, but keeps the burden light on our GIS people. When he also can tell us a story how long it took him to make it work. Nice. It looks so easy, but one thing I can tell you, it's horrendous work to make it look nice.
So there's a message of congratulations, which I think is important to flag.
Thank you.
Susanna. And then Ollie has asked that slide 19 had 3 maps, AIS, AIS and VMS. Is the increased activity shown in the AIS and VMS map due to the increased number of vessels in the data, or are they weighted for that?
Okay, yeah, perhaps I wasn't clear. So the first one was just for when we only had AIS data for those vessels. The one in the middle was the vessels for which we had VMS and AIS data put together. And the one on the right was just the VMS data. So just the vessels for which we had only VMS data. So that was just an example of how much data we were getting in each one of the 3 different strands of data.
Different amount of vessels. Data set.
Each data set had different amounts of vessels.
Yeah, it's not controlled for.
And that depends on the gear group as well. Yeah.
If there's no more burning question, we still have 40 minutes if somebody wants to have burning questions.
Give it a couple of seconds.
Otherwise, I think I also put down our contact details for anyone to contact us. I think we will, as soon as the web tool is online, send an email out to everyone that the web tool is online. As I said, most of the reporting, everything is done until end of September. There will be, again, email announcement for it so that everyone knows now it's time to look into it. Was there anything else to mention?
2 more questions though.
2 more questions.
The first one is whether we consider displacement from a preferred area due to the presence of offshore wind farms, and then that area that they move to being more productive and therefore permanently shifting fishing effort, i.e. no return. So presume the question is the shift experienced due to the infrastructure that's there or due to the new grounds being more productive?
Again, the model assumes that the fisher already knows best where he has the most productive ground or the most profitable ground. So you would assume if he's rational, maximize profit, he would have gone to the most productive ground to begin with. So the second ground shouldn't be, there might be biological changes, which causes that over time, secondary ground gets more productive, whatever reason. This might be the case, but I think that's why I come back to secondary impact is at the moment not considered in these models. So we need to find a way you actually put the biological stuff underneath it, the biological changes, how it changed the ecosystem, which will be in totally different kind of realms because they are even bigger spatial scale, the biological models. That's why I haven't even tackled this one yet. So as long as I don't know the really local changes to the ecosystem, can't really tell how it changed over time, the productivity. So these models can't capture this. So you can't, no, it's not in there, sorry.
And then the last question, which is quite a good question to end on, is where are the next steps, and I'll shape it slightly as chair's prerogative to say how will we recommend further studies or engagement.
Give us more money for research. No, sorry, joking. I think one of the recommendation is for us, which came out from the presentation. I mean, I can also leave it to Tanya to say some recommendation, but I think one of the peeves we had was data sharing. So this whole data accessibility, data sharing, streamlining would be good. That we don't spend only have a 2 years project on a 1 year just getting data accessible. Another thing which I try to highlight is it's not just about data collection per se. If you do data collection, you have to collect the right data, which actually informs and can inform the models. And this is not meant as a negative criticism to the data which is collected currently. It was collected for a specific reason. But now the policy landscape is changing. We want to use it for different things. You have to adapt the data collection to it. So the data collection needs to be aligned with the policy goals and then also collected the right data so that you can do these models you want to do. If it doesn't have to be statistical models, it can be deterministic, it can be other models, whatever you feel like is the best fit to your question. I think is one of the things. Where we are going from here, I think it's more or less writing the reports as a short-term goal and coming up with very good recommendation, which I don't have any more. Tanya, do you want to add some? Or Mark, do you want to add some?
I'm happy with what you said.
Yeah, I think that's a main big outcome.
I think from our side, the next steps are really identifying where the impacts associated with this project are, and then making sure that those impacts are genuinely realised. I think that's a really key part of the offshore wind evidence and change programme is the change. It's no good having lots of data if we don't use it. And so as we progress as well, we're looking at, and colleagues in the room with me here are looking at how we build this data into some of the spatial modelling that we do as part of our whole of seabed programme. And then, of course, we'll be considering any recommendations that are put forward by the project in terms of next steps and working with the rest of the advisory group to understand how best we take some of those recommendations forward.
Just to add, because I saw some people in the chat where names I'm familiar with, and I know that they're working a lot in this field. So it would be good if some of you guys have an idea of, what it needs for this project to have an impact, what is missing. Just drop us a line where you think, hey, actually, have you thought about this? This might be helpful as well. Around.
In which case, I think we've answered all the questions. Last thing is probably for me to say that from a Crown Estate perspective, to say thank you very much to the whole project team. There's been a huge amount of work that's going into this, and I genuinely believe that it's a significant step forwards in how we're looking at fishing and data that we can absorb and really kind of use in the future considerations of the UK sea area and how fisheries is taken into consideration in future spatial modelling. So thank you very much for that. It's appreciated and well done.
Thanks for that. Thanks everyone also for listening for us for over an hour. Trying to be engaged. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, but really thank you for everyone.